The letter was taped to my boat's windshield like a scarlet mark of shame. It was from the HOA, claiming my fishing boat violated community guidelines and demanding it be removed immediately or face heavy fines. My jaw clenched as I read their threats about unauthorized watercraft and unsightly property lowering values. What they didn't know, what they never even bothered to check, was that I wasn't just some homeowner with a hobby boat. I owned the entire lake they used for their picnics, their boat launches, and their fishing tournaments. For years, I let them enjoy it freely, without charging fees or enforcing restrictions. But this letter lit a fire inside me. If they wanted to play games with rules and power, they were about to learn just how deep their mistake ran. The lake wasn't theirs. It was mine, and I was done staying quiet. The letter wasn't fancy. It was printed on cheap white paper, folded once, and stuffed into a plastic sleeve that someone had taped to the windshield of my boat. At first I thought it was maybe a friendly note, something from one of the neighbors about the fish biting better at dusk, or a reminder about the neighborhood barbecue. But when I peeled it off and read the first line, my stomach tightened. It wasn't a friendly message, it was a notice. A notice from the Homeowners Association. Bold at the top were the words, "Community violation." They said my boat, a weathered but dependable aluminum fishing boat, was in direct violation of HOA community guidelines. They claimed it was unauthorized watercraft, improperly stored, and detrimental to community appearance. Then, in sharp legal language, they demanded I remove it within 7 days or face fines of up to $200 a day. $200 a day for leaving my own boat on my own dock, tied neatly like it had been for years. I stood there, for a long moment with the letter in my hand, the breeze rippling across the lake behind me. My boat didn't look like much to anyone else, I suppose. It wasn't shiny or new. The paint had faded to a dull gray, and there were a few scratches on the side from years of bumping against rocks. But it was mine. It had been my grandfather's, before me, and some of my best memories were made in that boat. I could still picture him, sitting in the back with his wide straw hat, showing me how to cast a line without tangling it. The thought that some clipboard-holding HOA officer could dismiss all of that history as unsightly made my blood boil. What made it worse was the arrogance in their tone. The letter didn't even suggest I talk to them, or give me the benefit of the doubt. No, it was pure command. Do this, or pay. I flipped the page over, but there was nothing on the back. Just the HOA's stamped signature and the fine schedule. They hadn't even signed it with a name. Whoever left it didn't even have the decency to talk to me face to face. I carried the letter into my house and set it down on the kitchen counter. For a while, I just stared at it, trying to decide if this was some kind of mistake. Maybe they thought my boat belonged to someone else. Maybe they didn't know who owned this stretch of shoreline. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't a mistake at all. It was deliberate. This was Karen's work. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen. She'd only been HOA president for 6 months. But she'd already made it her mission to put her stamp on everything. She didn't even live near the lake. Her house was 3 streets over, but she acted like she ruled the entire community. She sent out newsletters about uniform landscaping and acceptable exterior colors. She once tried to find a neighbor for hanging Christmas lights past January, even though it was only the second week. I'd kept my head down, figuring she'd eventually tire herself out. But this letter made one thing clear. She wasn't slowing down. She was escalating. And now, she had set her sights on me. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that she had picked the wrong fight. She thought I was just another homeowner with a toy boat and no backbone. She didn't know the truth. The lake wasn't community property. It wasn't owned by the HOA. It wasn't even public land. It belonged to me. The history of it went back nearly 100 years. My grandfather had purchased the land long before the subdivision was built. He had the foresight to buy not just the cabin where my family lived, but the entire body of water, every acre of it, surveyed and sealed with official deeds. When developers came decades later and built their neat rows of houses along the perimeter, they assumed the lake was part of the deal. But it wasn't. They built around it, not on it. My grandfather never sold it, never ceded it, never gave it away. When he passed, it went to my father. When my father passed, it came to me. I had never lorded it over the neighbors. I never posted no trespassing signs or charged anyone a fee to fish or swim. Quite the opposite. I liked the sound of kids laughing in the summer as they splashed in the shallows. I liked seeing old friends dragging kayaks down to the dock or families setting up picnic blankets near the shore. My philosophy was simple. If you respect the lake will give back. For years, that unspoken rule worked just fine. But Karen didn't respect anything she didn't control. I sat at the kitchen table, running my finger along the edge of the paper. For a split second, I thought about just ignoring it, tossing the letter in the trash, going back to my quiet evenings on the water. But I knew Karen. She wouldn't stop. Ignoring her would only embolden her. She'd send more letters, escalate the fines, maybe even try to tow the boat. The image of a tow truck dragging my grandfather's boat up the gravel road, scraping its hull, filled me with a rage I hadn't felt in years. I decided then and there that this wasn't just about a boat. This was about standing up to a bully who thought rules gave her the right to trample people. And if Karen wanted to play this game, She was about to find out I wasn't playing on her field. That night, I pulled out the old lockbox from the closet. Inside were the documents my grandfather had guarded like treasure, the property deed, the survey maps, the notarized seals. The papers were yellowed with age, but the ink was still sharp. I spread them out across the dining table and felt a kind of reassurance in the weight of history. This wasn't just a claim, it was fact. This lake was mine, in every legal sense. No HOA bylaw could override it. As I studied the papers, I remembered my grandfather's voice. Never let anyone tell you what's yours isn't, he once said, pointing at the shoreline. This lake is your responsibility now. Treat it well, and it will always treat you well. I had kept that promise, and I wasn't about to let Karen rewrite history with her cheap letters and hollow authority. The next morning, I went back down to the dock. The water was calm, reflecting the soft pink of sunrise. My boat bobbed gently, the letters still crumpled. In my pocket, for the first time in a while, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just the quiet guy who kept to himself anymore. I was the owner of this lake, and it was time to remind everyone of that fact. The HOA meetings were always held in the clubhouse, a squat brick building that smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. I'd avoided them for years. I didn't care about squabbles over lawn heights or what color someone's shutters could be. But that night, I walked through the double doors with the letter folded neatly in my pocket and a folder of my own documents tucked under my arm. My boots clicked against the tile as I entered, and I could feel the eyes of a dozen neighbors flick toward me. I wasn't usually the type to show up to these things, and my presence carried weight. Karen sat at the front of the room, perched behind a folding table like a queen on her throne. Her blonde bob haircut framed her face, and she wore a crisp blazer that made her look more like she was running for Congress than presiding over an HOA. She flashed a smile when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that said, "I've already won." The meeting was already in session. Karen was droning on about some new trash bin placement policy when she saw me step closer to the table. She cleared her throat and paused. "Ah, I see. We have Mr. Bennett joining us tonight," she announced, as if I were a guest speaker. A few heads turned. Some neighbors smiled politely, others looked wary. I nodded, pulled out the crumpled notice, and laid it flat on the table in front of her. "I'm here because of this," I said. My voice was calm but firm, and the room went quiet. Karen barely glanced at the paper. "Yes, that would be your violation notice," she said smoothly. "We've had several complaints about that boat. Of yours, it doesn't conform to community standards. It must be removed immediately." Her tone was clipped, final, like the matter had already been decided. A couple of neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One man in the back raised his hand slightly, then thought better of it. I straightened up and rested my hand on the folder I'd brought. "Before you continue, I think it's important everyone here understands something. That boat you're so concerned about, it's sitting on a dock that's not HOA property. In fact, the entire lake isn't HOA property. It belongs to me." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Karen's smile twitched. A woman in the second row frowned. "What do you mean?" someone whispered. I opened the folder and laid out the survey maps, the deed, and the notarized papers across the table. The documents looked old, but the stamps and seals were unmistakable. "This land has been in my family for generations," I said, pointing to the boundaries marked in ink. "The developers built your subdivision around the lake, but they never purchased the lake itself. My grandfather held the deed until it passed to my father. Now it's mine. Every inch of that water, from shore to shore, is private property. My property." The silence broke into murmurs. Heads bent together as neighbors tried to make sense of what I'd just said. Karen laughed lightly, but it was forced, brittle. "That's quite a story, Mr. Bennett," she said. "But with all due respect, this community has always treated the lake as shared property. You can't simply come in here and claim ownership of it." I tapped the papers with my finger. "This isn't a claim, it's fact. These are legal documents, filed with the county. You've been using my lake for your parties, your fishing tournaments, your kayaking events, all with my unspoken permission. I've never charged anyone a dime, but don't mistake generosity for weakness. That boat isn't in violation of your guidelines because your guidelines don't apply to my lake." Gasps rippled through the room. A man near the front, Mr. Rodriguez, raised his hand. "So all these years, we've been on your land?" he asked. His tone wasn't angry, just shocked. I nodded. "That's right. I never minded. I wanted the lake to be something everyone could enjoy. But now I'm being fined for having my own boat on my own property. That stops tonight." Karen's face reddened. She shuffled the papers, her manicured nails tapping nervously against the table. "Even if what you're saying is true, the HOA has the right to maintain the visual integrity of the community." "Your boat is Karen," I interrupted, my patience thinning. "You have no jurisdiction over this lake. None. Not one rule you write, not one fine you threaten, has any power here. And if you continue harassing me about it, I'll have no choice but to restrict access to the lake altogether." The room erupted. "Wait, what?" someone shouted. A woman with 2 kids leaned forward. "You mean we wouldn't be able to swim or fish anymore?" "Not unless I allowed it," I said plainly. I didn't want to sound cruel, but the truth had to be clear. I've never once told anyone they couldn't use the lake. But if the HOA keeps acting like they own it, I may have to reconsider. I'm not your enemy, but I won't be pushed around. Karen tried to raise her voice over the commotion. Everyone, calm down. This is just a misunderstanding. The HOA has always maintained the lake's perimeter maintained. I barked out a laugh. Don't give me that. You've never lifted a finger to clean this lake. I'm the one who treats for algae blooms. I'm the one who repairs the dock when storms damage it. I'm the one who pays property taxes on it. What exactly has the HOA done, Karen? Besides send me threats. The neighbors were no longer whispering, they were openly questioning her. A man in the back stood up. He's right, he said loudly. I've been here 20 years. He's always been the one taking care of the lake, not the HOA. Several others nodded in agreement. Karen's face tightened. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, scrambling for a way to spin this back in her favor. Finally, she held up a hand. Regardless of ownership, this community expects a certain standard. If we allow one unsightly boat, what's next? Rusted trailers, abandoned vehicles. I met her gaze without blinking. You're not protecting standards, Karen. You're protecting your ego. You thought I'd roll over, but you've just discovered you picked a fight on the wrong battlefield. A hush fell again. The neighbors were watching closely now, weighing every word. Some looked uneasy, but others seemed relieved that someone had finally stood up to her. I gathered my papers and slid them back into the folder. I'll make this clear for everyone here, I said, my voice carrying across the room. The lake is mine. Always has been, always will be. You're welcome to keep enjoying it, like you always have, but if I get one more letter, one more fine, or one more threat about my boat or anything else on this water, access ends. Permanently. And with that, I tucked the letter back into my pocket and turned for the door. My footsteps echoed as I left the clubhouse, and the murmur of voices rose behind me. Some were angry, some confused, but many were supportive. I could hear someone say, "He's right," as the door swung shut behind me. Outside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of pine. I walked back down the gravel road toward my cabin, the weight of the folder heavy in my hand, but lighter in my heart. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control again. Karen had tried to corner me, but now the tables were turned. She thought she could use rules to bully me. She didn't realize that when it came to the lake, I was the rule. That night, I sat out on the dock with my boat bobbing beside me. The water was still, reflecting the stars above. My phone buzzed with a couple of texts from neighbors thanking me for speaking up. I knew Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot, but as I sat there, I felt a calm resolve settle in. This was my lake, my grandfather's legacy, and if Karen wanted a war, she'd just learned I wasn't afraid to fight one. The week after that HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt different. People weren't whispering about whose lawn was an inch too long or who hadn't brought their trash bins in by noon. Instead, the talk was about me, about the lake, and about Karen. Everywhere I went, I caught the side glances, the curious stares, the quiet nods of support. Some neighbors would stop me at the mailbox to ask questions. "Is it true you really own the whole lake?" one woman asked in a hushed tone, like it was some town secret. I'd smile politely and tell her yes, it was true, and that nothing was changing as long as the HOA didn't push any further. But not everyone was so kind. A few folks had clearly fallen under Karen's spell, or maybe they just didn't like the idea of one man holding authority over something they thought of as community space. One morning, as I walked down the gravel drive to fetch the paper, I overheard two men talking on the corner. "It's not right," one of them muttered. "Nobody should own a lake. It belongs to everyone." The other snorted. "Maybe, but if it's his, it's his. Not much we can do about it." That was the problem. Karen had taken the truth I laid out and twisted it into something ugly. She wasn't telling people, "He's letting us use the lake for free." No, she was spinning it as, "He's hoarding the lake," claiming it like some baron from the old days. And the scary part was, some people were starting to believe her. It began with her newsletters. Every week she'd send out a neatly printed 2-page sheet with HOA updates. Normally it was about paint codes or upcoming neighborhood socials. Now, it was about me. In one. She wrote, "Residents should be aware that recent claims of lake ownership may threaten our shared traditions. As a community, we must stand together to protect access for everyone. No single individual should hold the power to restrict what has always been ours." She never used my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. In another, she suggested that private land claims could lead to restricted swimming, closed-off fishing, and even fees for use. That one made me laugh out loud. Fees. I'd lived here my whole life and never charged anyone a cent, but she was planting fear. And fear spreads faster than the truth. It didn't stop with newsletters. At the coffee shop in town, I overheard someone say, "Did you hear he's planning to fence off the lake?" Another day, someone left a flyer on my mailbox that read, "Say no to selfish landowners. Keep the lake free." It was written in big block letters, clearly printed at home, but I had no doubt whose idea it was. I tried not to let it get to me. Most of my neighbors still greeted me kindly. Some even came right out and said, "Don't worry about Karen. We know what you've done for this place." That helped, but the whispers kept building. One evening, as I sat out on my dock, my neighbor James wandered over with his fishing pole. He's an old-timer, retired, been living here nearly as long as I have. He cast his line into the water and sighed. "You've got yourself a mess," he said. "Tell me about it," I muttered. "She's turning people against you. Folks who used to mind their own business are suddenly asking me if you're planning to kick them out." I tell them, "You're not that kind of man," but fear's a hard thing to fight once it takes root. I nodded. I never wanted to kick anyone out, but I won't be bullied either. James reeled in his line and looked me straight in the eye. "You've been more generous than anyone else would have been. Don't let her paint you as the villain if it comes to it. You show them those papers again. Make it official." His words stuck with me. A few days later, Karen made her boldest move yet. She scheduled an emergency HOA meeting and plastered notices all over the neighborhood. The heading read, "Protect Our Lake Community Action Required." That night, the clubhouse was packed wall to wall. I didn't even have to walk in to know what was going on. Through the windows, I saw her at the front, pacing like a preacher in her pulpit. When I finally stepped inside, all eyes turned toward me. The room buzzed with tension. Karen's voice cut through the chatter. "Well, look who decided to join us," she said sweetly, her words dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe you'd like to explain to everyone here why you believe you should hold the power to control our lake." I could feel the heat of the crowd pressing in, 100 pairs of eyes waiting for my answer. But before I could speak, she launched into her speech. "For decades," she said, "this lake has been the heart of our community. It's where our children learned to swim, where our families gathered for barbecues, where we've held fishing contests and fireworks shows. And now, one man wants to take it all away. One man thinks he can decide who belongs and who doesn't. Is that fair? Is that what community means?" The room erupted in murmurs. Some people clapped, others looked uneasy. I raised my voice over the noise. "That's not the truth, and you know it. I have never restricted anyone from using the lake. Never once, but I also won't allow you to bully me on my own property." Karen's smile widened. "Then, prove it. Sign an agreement tonight. Put it in writing that the HOA has shared authority over the lake. If you're really as generous as you claim, what's the harm?" I froze. That was her play all along. She wanted me to sign away control, to hand the HOA power they never had? A trap, wrapped up in honeyed words? "No," I said simply. The room gasped. A woman shouted, "So it's true. You do want to keep it for yourself." Another man added, "We can't let him take our lake." The noise swelled, and I could feel the tide of fear and anger rising against me. I slammed the folder of deeds onto the table, the sound echoing through the room. "You all need to hear this. I own the lake. That is a legal fact, not a claim. But I have never once kept you from enjoying it. Who do you think fixes the dock when it breaks? Who pays the taxes every year? Who cleans up the trash after your 4th of July fireworks? Me? Not the HOA? Me? And now Karen wants you to believe I'm the threat. Think again." The noise died down a little, but Karen wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Maybe you own it on paper, but this community has used it for decades. It's ours by tradition, if not by law. And if you won't cooperate, maybe the county needs to step in. Maybe the courts should decide." Her words sent a chill through me. She wasn't just smearing my name now, she was threatening to drag me into legal battles, the kind that could drain a man dry even if he was right. I gathered my papers, my jaw tight. "Be careful what you wish for, Karen. You want to take this to court? Fine. But when the judge reads these deeds, don't expect sympathy. And don't expect me to keep the lake open for people who treat me like an enemy." I walked out before she could reply, the crowd splitting like water as I passed. Outside, the night air felt heavy, full of the weight of what had just happened. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own neighborhood, but as I reached my truck, I heard footsteps behind me. It was James, his fishing cap pulled low. "Don't let her scare you," he said quietly. "Half those people in there don't really believe her. They're just scared she'll make their lives miserable if they don't nod along. She thrives on fear. You've got the truth." I nodded, though my chest still burned. Karen wasn't backing down. She was building an army, and if I wasn't careful, she'd poison every neighbor against me. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to hand over my lake. Not to her, not to anyone. That night, as I sat on the dock watching the moonlight ripple across the water, I realized something my grandfather had always known. Owning the lake wasn't just about property lines, it was about responsibility. And if Karen wanted to turn this into a battle for control, I would meet her head, because the lake wasn't just mine, it was my legacy. And no smear campaign could take that away. The notice came in the mail on a Thursday afternoon, sandwiched between a grocery flyer and a credit card offer. At first I thought it was just another HOA letter, another hollow threat Karen had cooked up. But this envelope was different. It wasn't cheap printer paper with a neighborhood logo. It was official, with the county court seal stamped in blue. My hands tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a summons. The HOA had filed a petition requesting legal authority to manage and regulate the community lake for the benefit of all residents. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper spread out in front of me, my pulse pounding. It was worse than I thought. Karen hadn't just been trying to sway public opinion with her newsletters and speeches. She was dragging me into court, aiming to strip me of my rights through legal maneuvering. She wanted a judge to declare the lake community property. If she won, not only would I lose control of my grandfather's legacy, but the HOA could dictate every rule, from who could fish to whether my boat could exist at all. I called James first. He was quiet as I read the notice aloud over the phone. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "She's playing a dangerous game," he said. "But she's underestimating you. You've got the documents. She's got smoke and mirrors. Judges don't buy smoke." Still, his words couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. I'd never set foot in a courtroom for anything more serious than jury duty. I wasn't the type to fight legal battles. But Karen had forced my hand. If she wanted a showdown, I'd give her one. The weeks leading up to the court date were some of the hardest of my life. Karen doubled down on her campaign, painting me as a selfish tyrant who wanted to hoard the lake. Flyers appeared on lampposts. "Save our lake, stop greed." A post went up on the neighborhood Facebook group accusing me of planning to charge admission fees. People I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Others still nodded or waved, but the doubt in their eyes was unmistakable. I tried to focus on preparation. I dug deeper into my grandfather's papers, pulling out every scrap of documentation. Old maps, tax receipts, even photographs of him building the first dock. I hired a lawyer, a sharp gray-haired man named Peterson who specialized in property disputes. He flipped through the stack of documents and nodded. "You've got an ironclad case," he said. "She doesn't stand a chance in court. But be ready, she'll throw everything she can at you before she loses." On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to my father's funeral. My hands shook slightly as I tied my tie, but I forced myself to breathe steady. This wasn't just about me. It was about my family's history, about respect, about standing up to someone who thought power gave her the right to take whatever she wanted. The courthouse was an old brick building downtown. Its stone steps worn from 100 years of footsteps. When I walked into the courtroom, Karen was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with two attorneys beside her. She looked smug, her blazer crisp, her hair perfectly styled. When her eyes met mine, she smiled faintly, like she was certain she'd already won. The judge entered, a stern man with silver hair, and called the session to order. Karen's lawyers launched into their argument first. They spoke about community, tradition, and shared use. They claimed the lake was integral to the neighborhood's identity, and that my assertion of private ownership was unfair and detrimental to the collective good. Karen sat back, nodding at every word like she was the savior of the neighborhood. At one point, she even dabbed her eyes with a tissue, as her lawyer described children being deprived of their cherished summers on the lake. Theatrics. Pure and simple. When it was our turn, Peterson stood confidently. He laid the deed on the judge's bench with deliberate care, then placed the survey maps beside it. "Your Honor, the facts are simple," he said. "The lake is private property. It has been in Mr. Bennett's family for generations. The HOA has never owned it, never purchased rights to it, never maintained it. All they have is a sense of entitlement, not legal authority." I sat quietly as Peterson presented decades of tax records, each one showing my family paying levies on the lake property. He showed photographs of my grandfather maintaining the shoreline, my father dredging silt, me repairing the dock after a storm. "This is not community property," Peterson concluded. "This is a man's legacy, and the HOA has no jurisdiction here." The judge leafed through the documents for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he turned to Karen. "Mrs. Thompson," he said evenly, "do you have any evidence in a deed? Any contract, any record at all that grants your HOA authority over this lake?" Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lawyers scrambled, flipping through their binders. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while we may not have direct ownership documents, the principle of implied community use." The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. "Implied use does not override recorded ownership." His gaze shifted back to Karen. "What you are asking this court to do is strip a man of his lawful property rights because you don't like the fact that he has them. That is not how the law works." Karen's face flushed bright red. She started to protest, but the judge's voice boomed enough. "This case is dismissed. Furthermore, Mrs. Thompson, I strongly advise you to cease harassing Mr. Bennett. Continued attempts to undermine his ownership could be grounds for legal action against you." The gavel struck, and just like that, it was over. Relief washed through me so fast it left me dizzy. Peterson clapped me on the shoulder. "Told you," he said with a satisfied grin. Karen, meanwhile, sat frozen in her seat, her expression crumbling. For the first time since this began, she didn't look smug or confident. She looked small, defeated. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, her eyes darting around the room as though looking for someone to back her up. But the neighbors who had shown up to support her weren't clapping anymore. They filed out in silence, avoiding her gaze. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. James was waiting on the steps, leaning on his cane. "How'd it go?" he asked. though the smile on my face probably gave it away. She lost, I said simply. He chuckled. Knew she would. Bullies always think they're smarter than they are. Glad you put her in her place. That evening, when I got back to the lake, a few neighbors were waiting. Families with kids, fishermen with tackle boxes, even some teenagers. With kayaks, they gathered near my dock, looking a little uncertain. One woman stepped forward. We just wanted to say thank you, she said, for standing up for yourself, for standing up for the lake. We're sorry for how some of us treated you. I nodded, moved more than I expected. You don't need to apologize, I said. The lake is still here for everyone. Always has been. Just respect it. That's all I ask. As the sun set, kids splashed in the shallows again, their laughter ringing across the water. The old rhythm of the neighborhood returned, free from the cloud Karen had cast. But as I watched the ripples spreading out across the lake, I knew this wasn't just a victory in court. It was a reminder of why I fought in the first place. Not for power, not for pride, but for legacy. For the promise I'd made to my grandfather and Karen. She might still try to stir trouble in her own way, but her power was broken. She'd gone to war over something she never owned, and in the end, she learned a lesson the hard way. You don't mess with a man's lake. The weeks after the courtroom battle felt almost surreal. For so long, Karen's shadow had loomed over every part of the neighborhood. Her flyers, her rants, her constant accusations, those things had poisoned even the most peaceful days on the lake. But once the gavel struck and the judge dismissed her case, it was as if the air itself had cleared. The whispers stopped, the tension melted, and for the first time in months, I could stand on my dock and hear nothing but the quiet lap of water against the shore. But freedom didn't come without echoes of the fight. Even though the case was behind me, I knew there was healing to be done both for me and for the community. The neighbors had been divided, and whether or not they had sided with Karen, they all had to live with the fallout. I couldn't ignore that, not if I wanted peace to last. One Saturday morning, I walked the length of the shoreline, past houses and docks that had stood here almost as long as mine. Some neighbors waved as I passed. Others hesitated, guilty looks flickering across their faces. By the time I got back home, I realized I needed to take the first step. Not because I owed anyone an apology, but because the lake didn't deserve to become a symbol of grudges. It was meant to be a place of connection, of laughter, of summer memories. My grandfather had taught me that much, so I drafted a simple letter and slid copies into mailboxes up and down the road. It wasn't long or complicated, just a note inviting everyone to a lake gathering the following weekend. No agenda, no speeches, just food, laughter, and a chance to enjoy the water together, a chance to start fresh. When the day came, I wasn't sure if anyone would show. I set up a long table near my dock, covered it with food, hot dogs, corn on the cob, baked beans, and pitchers of lemonade. I set up a few chairs, rolled out a cooler of ice, and dragged a couple of kayaks into the shallows for the kids. Then, I waited out at first. It was quiet. I almost wondered if I'd misjudged, if maybe everyone was too embarrassed or too stubborn to come. But then, just as the sun hit its peak, I heard the sound of voices. Down the road, families were walking toward me, parents, kids, even the older couples who rarely left their porches. They came with dishes in their hands and hopeful looks on their faces. Before long, the shoreline was alive again. Kids ran laughing into the water, teenagers splashed each other off their kayaks, and neighbors lined up for food. Some people came up to me directly, apologizing for how they had doubted me. One man admitted he had believed Karen's stories until the trial exposed the truth. Another said he wished he had spoken up in my defense sooner. I listened, accepted their words, and let it go. Holding on to anger would only anchor me in the past. What mattered now was the lake itself, and the people who loved it. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself sitting by the fire pit with James, who had been grinning all day as he watched kids build sandcastles near the shore. Told you this lake wasn't just water, he said. It's the heart of this place. You did the right thing, bringing everyone back together. I nodded, staring out at the rippling water. I guess it's not really mine alone, even if it's in my name, I said softly. It belongs to everyone who respects it. That's what my grandfather wanted. James patted my shoulder. And that's exactly what you're doing, protecting it, not hoarding it. There's a difference Karen never understood. Speaking of Karen, she was nowhere to be seen. After her defeat in court, she had vanished from the community spotlight. The HOA had called an emergency meeting a week later, where it was revealed that she had been quietly mismanaging funds for years, funneling money into administrative expenses that benefited her more than the neighborhood. With her credibility in ruins, she was voted out of her position as president. Rumors swirled that she'd put her house up for sale, though I never saw a for sale sign myself. Maybe she was too proud to admit defeat publicly, or maybe she was planning one last trick. But honestly, I no longer cared. For the first time in years, her power didn't matter anymore. That evening, as the gathering wound down, I lit a bonfire. By the edge of the lake, people sat around it with plates of dessert, the crackling flames painting warm light on their faces. Someone brought out a guitar, and soon music drifted into the night air. Kids roasted marshmallows, their laughter Mingling with the crackle of the fire and the gentle sounds of the water, it was exactly the kind of evening my grandfather would have loved. I could almost see him there, sitting in his old lawn chair, nodding in approval. As the stars came out, I stood and raised my glass. The crowd grew quiet, turning toward me. I wasn't one for speeches, but the words came easily. "This lake has been in my family for generations," I said. "It's part of who I am." And for a while, I was afraid it would tear this neighborhood apart. But standing here tonight, I see what it really is. Not a dividing line, but a gathering place. My promise is simple, I'll keep protecting this lake, not just for me, but for everyone who loves it and treats it with respect. That's what my grandfather wanted, and that's what I'll do. The crowd erupted in cheers, glasses raised, applause echoing across the water, and for the first time since this battle began, I felt something stronger than relief. I felt peace. The months that followed were calm, filled with a quiet normalcy I hadn't realized I'd missed. Neighbors waved again, without hesitation. Kids fished off the docks without anyone keeping score. The HOA, under new leadership, stuck to what it was meant to do, maintaining lawns, managing the pool, and staying out of matters that were never theirs to control. Every morning, I still walked the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise spread across the lake. Some mornings fishermen were already out in their boats, waving as they passed. Other mornings it was just me, the mist rising off the water, and the steady reminder that peace was worth the fight. Karen never returned to power. And eventually, the gossip about her faded too. The neighborhood moved on, the way it always does, and I kept living my life by the lake, proud of the legacy I had defended. In the end, the battle with the HOA had taught me something I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about deeds, or rights, or legal victories. It was about understanding the difference between ownership and stewardship. My grandfather had entrusted me with this lake, not so I could keep it locked away, but so I could make sure it remained a place of joy, memory, and belonging. And that's exactly what it became again. Not because of Karen, not because of the HOA, but because when it mattered, I chose to stand my ground. Because sometimes, the only way to honor the past is to fight for the present. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Bright Reality for more powerful real-life stories brought to life.